If you want to see how betting sports is like betting hands at a poker game, you've come to the right spot. Check it out. Welcome to Data-Driven Sports Betting. I'm A-Train Bets, and I use my brain to make bets. Now, in this video, we've been talking a lot on our live streams lately about how betting sports is really a lot like a poker game. Because if you think about it, you've got different people in different scenarios. Now, granted, we're playing our bets against sports books, right? But think about what's really happening on the back end. Sports books have traders, which they call the people that are setting the odds within a sports book. Those are people. They are thinking about different aspects of different betting markets and different games and different players and all of that stuff. But then they're also taking a lot of influence from two other sources. One is other sharp books or other sports books out there that they can see what the other books are doing, so they can take cues from them to kind of calibrate their own lines. And then two, they're also looking at the behaviors of individuals. They're looking at people and how they bet and what they're betting at their particular book, or any other insights they can get about sentiment in the market by becoming aware that there's people behind all of the data, that all of these odds and all of our opportunities on all of the bet markets are really being given to us as opportunities because of the actions of other humans. It gets us thinking about how that's similar to like a poker game. In a poker game, you see the other people sitting around a table, and you have your cards, you have your chips, and you have whatever circumstances exist around you. And you think about that in terms of sports betting, similar story. Right? We see some of the information. It's on our screens, on tools like A-Train Station, all the data that's presented to us, any other information that we may be bringing in about our knowledge from the sporting event or the bet markets or the historical patterns or any of our skills. All of that stuff is stuff that we have to work with, right? Then we look at the situation around us. What are the other players doing? What are people doing? How are they moving? What information are they giving us through their actions? And what are the quantifiable details in front of us? What cards are in the middle of the table that everybody has access to? What are the things that you are observing in the way other people are playing? Now, granted, in sports betting, it manifests a little bit different, but what we're doing is effectively the same thing. Is we're looking at the situation that surrounds us, and we're trying to determine simply, do we want to make a bet? And if we do, how much? At its core, that's our entire decision matrix. That's exactly what you do in poker. In poker, it's, do I want to make a bet or not? And if I do, how much? Right? Am I putting chips in the middle or am I not? Am I folding the hand? Right? And in a sports betting context, if I fold the hand, I'm just not making the play. If I am going to make the play and I'm going to stay part of this pot, then I have to decide how much do I want to bet. Well, we can take the same kind of mentality that we have in a poker game and apply it to sports betting. Because in a poker game, sometimes you're like, my goodness, look at these cards. These are the best cards. And it's just a function of how much do I extract from the other people at the table. Now, that doesn't happen enough, as far as I'm concerned, at least when I play poker. Probably doesn't happen enough for you either. But in sports betting, you're rarely going to have that scenario where you know you have the absolute nuts in your hand, because there's so much uncertain information that surrounds us. We'll never quite know that this is a lock, right? Anybody who claims that they have locks, no, they don't. No, they don't. There's too much information out there that's just not known. People gotta go play a game. You don't know that. You can't predict the future. You're not Biff with a fucking sports almanac. Come on. So we only will have a sense that we have a good edge at best, right? So, but what we need to do, just like in a poker game, is when we have the best of it, we want to put our chips in the pot. When we don't have the best of it, it doesn't mean we never play. It just means that we need to play a little bit differently or a little bit less, or we need to see things through, feel it out and say, not too certain on this. I'll make a value bet and maybe I'll get lucky. That works the exact same way in sports betting. So the way I'd say is just recognize that your chips, your dollars, the bet sizing that you have is a tool for you to use, just like selecting the bet itself. Again, do I make a bet or not? And if I do, how much? And that's really at the core of why you want to be sizing your bets based on your confidence in the read, in the edge, in the likelihood of winning, and whether or not this is a favorite and more likely to hit, or it's an underdog and it's going to pay great if it does hit. These are things that you're going to want to factor in as you approach that pot, that bet, that opportunity in a sports betting market. And you're going to do it quickly because it just goes, you're going to make the play and then you're going to move to the next one. Different than poker, but not that different. There's always another poker hand that you can play if you don't go broke on this hand, right? So in sports betting too, that's why we have to be thoughtful around, Are we managing our bankroll effectively? Are we taking on too much risk and too high of bet sizing for that risk? Are we not taking on enough risk and we're leaving too much of our bankroll to sit idle and not having it work for us? Right? If you have $1 million in front of you and you're betting $5 a hand, I don't know much, but at the end of this, you're probably going to have about $1 million, right? Like it's just too small of a bet size to move the needle, right? So you don't want to go too extreme on either end, but you do want to size those bets appropriately for your level of confidence. So given that, I want to show you a few examples of how you might choose to do that, or how I would choose to do that using A-Train Station, and how I look at different plays. Because one of the things that A-Train Station is really important is that we look at these scenarios and we try to understand the data story behind them, realizing that there's not just one point of view in sports betting. There's so much uncertain information. We should look at it as many different directions as possible to determine whether or not we want to make that play, and if we do, how much. All right, so let's look at it. Here's one play in NBA. This is a Miles Turner threes player prop. And what do we see here? So we're using currently our default weightings on this particular evaluation. And what we immediately see through the visualization that A-Train Station provides is we have a very tight market. This is what I'd call a tight market. Most of the odds that books are offering are very well aligned. And then you have FanDuel. Okay, this we see a lot. You see FanDuel's like, yep, I'm doing this. You guys do what you like. We're over here now. And okay, so we see, by some measures, you would say this is a traditional outlier line. What we also know, which would be a little bit of a yellow flag, is that we've seen a lot of line movement from FanDuel that we have not seen evidence in the market. So this is this horizontal line is indicative of line movement over the time we've been tracking this bet. And you can see down here, it's ranged from plus 110 to minus 113 on this side. And if we find FanDuel down here, we can see it's minus 140 to minus 113 on that side of the bet. Right, so that's just displayed visually up here. So that's a sign of, well, is FanDuel moving for a reason, or are they just crazy? Jury's out. Right? So we don't know. So what we can do, though, is say, okay, well, there's a couple sharp books that we like to key off of when we're looking at the totality of a situation in our bet market detail screen. We see Bet Online and Pinnacle, and they're right here at the top, which means they have relatively low hold. If we go and say, you know what, let's just look at Bet Online here, because Bet Online is generally our preferred source when it comes to player props. So we bring in Bet Online, and now we can see we're only running our calculations based on Bet Online as the sharp book. And in this case, we still see a fair amount of advantage, but generally I'm trying to target 2% on my player props. So this is a little bit below that. We see some line movement that's concerning. If I go back to our overall weightings, it's still only 1.5% on our overall book default weightings, but there may be enough to play here. It's such a nice tight market for everybody else. FanDuel's done something, and I don't believe that they are so bold and so knowledgeable that in the face of a fairly deep market here, they have specific information nobody else has. I might play this, but we look at it and we look at our bet size recommendation based on the overall 1.5% on the default weightings. Say it's $50 at FanDuel. I do love the dynamic too when we have this 1+ money in an entire market, which means this is relatively close to a coin flip, but FanDuel's offering us a good deal. Right? There's no doubt that this is the best deal in this market right now. So when I go to look and play this, I might say, you know what? I'm going to play this at FanDuel. I'm not quite willing to play $50 on a 1.51% because it just is a pretty tight read. And I don't think we have a ton of value. I might want to reduce this and value play it for $30 instead of $50 or $25. And that's probably what I would do. I'd reduce it a little bit further, make a value play, think we have a little bit of an edge, and then I'd go about my business. Say on that investment, I think we've got a little bit of an edge, and then I'm going to move on from there. But that's why I'm not going to go totally in, because I see this one sign of the FanDuel movement, and it's like, I'm going to pump the brakes a little bit. And that means I have less money at risk. So even if my read is wrong, I'm risking less into a read that I can't be as confident in because I don't have a whole lot of margin to work with here. That's what that EV percentage does. Okay, next up, Detroit Pistons, New York Knicks, another player prop, Cade Cunningham. We're looking at points under 20 and a hook. Well, in this case, thinner market than we just looked at. We have Bet Online, though. Look at Bet Online, which is, like we talked about, our preferred source for player props. And right now we're looking at default weightings. And so if I go and I do Bet Online alone on this one, what we see is all of a sudden this looks like a 3% play. Once I start getting to 3%, I'm like, oh, no, I'm pretty interested in this. So again, I'm looking at BetOnline versus the rest of a fairly light market. Now you see these three, these are just duplicates. They're just different names for the same backend. There's a Canby backend with BetRivers. And so these are all the same. So just treat it as one because it's just one book effectively with a few different white labels on it. In this case, I'm looking at this and I'm like, I like that there's consolidation in the rest of the market. I think Canby books here are off everybody else. I think BetOnline is at the polar end, and I have 3% to work with here. I have a good amount of margin. In this case, I'm pushing chips, baby. I am in on this. I'm probably playing full beans. Now, the way I size my Kelly bet criterion to get to these recommendations, this is generally going to be my upper limit. This is what the calculation says. I'm going to be the max comfortable with this. Now, could I round to $100? Sure. I can adjust. It's not that precise. But if you size your bets and then you just say, okay, based on my level of confidence, I'm going to pull back from there. It's a fairly straightforward read. In this case, I like it enough. I'm probably going to play full beans. So this one, we are going to go to bet market details for Brooklyn Nets and Memphis Grizzlies. Now, here's an interesting situation, right? What we see here is a scenario where we've used just our Pinnacle alone betting strategy to run this one. And what we found was something concerning or interesting, depending on your perspective. In this case, we see a number of books and we see this kind of continuum. Like there's a lot of varying feelings in this market and nobody's really aligned. Maybe there's some alignment here at -120, -110. But Pinnacle's like, at some point, they'd found information or did something, and granted, Pinnacle being a sharp book, they decided they're going to move pretty substantially to the left, and I would assume for a reason. They were right with everybody else for a while, and now you can see that they are all the way on the edge. Again, we see a scenario where here you could actually play both sides and have a guaranteed net neutral bet. So in that scenario, we know there's EV to be had. We just don't know which side necessarily, but it could be betting at Pinnacle. If you look at just the numbers here, that's certainly a possibility. If you look at this side, it certainly could be a possibility. But here's the thing, that there's two conflicting pieces of information here. One, you have Pinnacle, sharp book, moved substantially when nobody else has moved. Could that be a first mover? Potentially. Could they know something? Potentially. Could they just have taken a huge order and need to balance out their books? Potentially, right? You see our preferred book for player props at BetOnline, they're nowhere near Pinnacle, right? They are just kind of representative of the overall market at this point. And so that gives me a bit of pause, a little bit of concern, right? If I go to BetOnline, there's no value in this play if I do BetOnline as a sharp book. All right, so that is a scenario that concerns me. So in this case, I am enticed because I love big percentages based on my Pinnacle alone strategy, but I see enough concerns here that maybe I don't want to make this play at all. But then I'd be like, but I like the big numbers, right? So that's where I'm going to be saying, okay, well, I'm looking at it from different points of view. I'm considering it. It's not taking a long time. I'm walking through it verbally, so it's taking longer than it would if I was just looking at it. But do I want to bet into Pinnacle, the sharpest book of the world, with their heavy line movement in a direction and say maybe they've moved first when everybody else is getting caught out? Potentially. So what I would probably do here is I'm like, wow, 4% at FanDuel. That's the place I'd probably lean to play because I'm going to get limited at BetRivers. If I'm going to play at FanDuel here, I got a lot to work with on percent. Pinnacle could be only sort of right, and I'd still have a very viable play. So in this case, what I'm probably going to do is I say, well, I'm not playing 145. I don't have that level of confidence in this play, but I might play 75. I might cut it in half and say, I'm going to play 75 at FanDuel because I see some red flags, but I can't get past this heavy line movement with Pinnacle. I think it's compelling, but I have to temper it a little bit because BetOnline hasn't moved yet in that kind of substantial fashion. If I saw BetOnline move exactly the same as Pinnacle and everybody else was just sitting around, I would be going probably close to full beans. I might, on player props, I tend to not go much over $100 currently, so I'd probably reduce it just because of that, just from a loss limit type of scenario. But that's where I'm always factoring in all of the data to try to arrive at the right answer. That's why it's so important to be able to see what's going on and factor in all the information at hand. Because if you're just trying to look, if your odds screen looks like this, you're not going to pull out all the information I just did. You're just not going to be able to see it. You're going to be able to look at it and say, well, this number is bigger. Let's bet that, right? No, like you just don't have it. So like, I don't care if you use our tool. I mean, I'd love for you to use our tool. But to me, you have to understand how to assess these scenarios so that you can make the right decision. In this case, again, I'm going to play it. I'm going to reduce the bet sizing just like at a poker table. I'm going to put fewer chips in that pot. Okay. Finally, let's look at this one. This one is one more player prop. This is on a points under. And what we see here is what I call kind of a bifurcated market to a point, but it's really not. It's what it is here is you have it just comes off like confusion. You have some what I would call relatively lazy lines here. Nobody's moved anything. They just kind of probably started with these lines. They're not doing too much. And then you see, all right, Pinnacles come in, started in a different spot anyway, but then moved substantially to the right. You see the Canby books here started way further to the left, actually, and moved further to the left. There's actually an arbitrage opportunity here. That's what you can see in the purple. And when you see that, that's when you're like, okay, I can play both sides and guarantee a profit. So you know there's positive EV to be had. Is it going to be at Pinnacle or is it going to be at Bet Rivers? Well, both sides. If you think of this as the general market, both sides are just crisscrossing in opposite directions. And so that's why we have this arbitrage opportunity. I am going to play this at Bet Rivers for whatever I can get down because it's going to be less than the 140 because I'm factoring in the fact that I would have a limit here. But let's assume I didn't have a limit. Do I want to play this full beans or am I a little bit concerned? I'm probably going to play this close to full beans. I'm probably going to go almost all in unless I have some sort of stop loss limit because I see most of these books are just like trying to get through the day. There's no line movement here. That means they're not reacting to anything. It's a pretty, obscure market. Some random person points under on a hockey game. So that's not a super heavily bet market. Right? So there's not going to be a ton of market efficiency coming from the actual movements. When I see the best, sharpest book in the world with some more movement than anybody else, I'm going to take notice of that. The other thing that I'm going to notice too is this is the hold percentage. Look at how much lower Pinnacle's hold is than anybody else. The one thing we know about Pinnacle as well is that they will size their hold based on their level of confidence. Well, something here at Pinnacle saying they're confident about this and they've moved substantially. This is pedal to the metal. I'm pushing the chips. I'm pushing the chips on this to the level I'm comfortable on a player prop. That's how I'm playing this one. Going to Bet Rivers and putting in whatever I'm max comfortable with. This is a max play, not betting my whole fucking bankroll, but it's a play where I am going to push this hard because I know definitively, mathematically, there has to be plus EV on the side. I am putting my money at Bet Rivers because I'm trusting Pinnacle to be the sharp book in this scenario. This is the kind of thing that you need to be doing if you want to approach sports betting as a true sharp sports bettor. You need to look at all that information that's coming your way. You need to be thinking about it and just taking in all the information that's available so that you can make the right call. And granted, in a scenario like this, it's not that hard of a read. It's not hard to determine, oh yeah, I'm going to bet at Bet Rivers here. You could do that in 2 seconds. What the part here that I really want you to think about is when are you pushing your chips? When are you pulling them back? When are you value betting? When are you walking away? Those are the things that are so important in how we bet sports, just like how we play a poker game. You're not in it to win one hand. You're not in it to win one bet. You are in it to maximize your return. And maximizing your return comes from sustained, thoughtful patterns of exploiting the edges in the appropriate amounts so that you're building your bankroll over time. And so on any given play, you may win or lose, but if you're approaching it methodically, you're approaching it thoughtfully, you're bringing in all the insights, you're saying, ooh, look at that hold. And you're saying, ooh, look at that line movement. Ooh, let's look at this from a different book weighting perspective. These are the things that are going to give you that edge that nobody else is doing out there. If they're not using A-Train Station, they can't even see that stuff. So take it, use it, learn it, understand how you can get that added advantage. Sometimes it's like being able to pick cards from the other opponents at a poker table and say, like, show me that card, show me that card, show me that card. All right, now you have additional information that nobody else at that table has, right? That's the kind of thing that you can do when you're bringing in the entire data story about each of these plays. So with that, hopefully you learned a couple things, and hopefully you can take that poker setting, that poker mentality, and apply it to your sports betting a little bit more effectively going forward. So that's what we wanted to cover today. For now, this train's leaving the station. Until next time, save the units for the bros and do your betting like the pros.